just so
Hmm.
got that out of the way. Wow. Hello. Welcome, you two. It's so nice to see you in a shared space together. Darryl, I'm Jessica. We've not had the pleasure of meeting in person yet. So this is what my face looks like. So you can match the voice to the face. Quincy mentioned that you guys had met in passing a couple of years ago when your collection was at the Mint Center. But we'll have plenty of time to get caught up with each other to hear what we've been doing since then. Quincy, I sent Darryl some of your checklists, so he has some idea of what will be in the exhibition as like a start for our conversation today. I just want to say from the jump, this is already successful for me. You know, like we've already done it. You guys just meeting here together today is like the best feeling. You're the first conversation of the 4. So I feel like this is such a good kickoff and a good launch. This does so many things. I don't want to talk too much anymore because I know we're starting a little bit late. So I just want to make sure that I can honor your time. And I don't want to direct the conversation in any particular type of way. Low stakes. It's going to be great. I'm going to pull out excerpts. So don't feel like, and if there's anything that you say that you want to redact or do something like this, there's absolutely no problem.
Hey, Jessica, hold on. Darryl said, hold on one second. He's trying to
no problem.
get his echo straight. Technology, you know?
That's right.
Yeah, I think he's changing up devices on us. It's all good.
Okay. There you go.
Hey, Darryl, you're on mute.
I got you.
Okay.
All right, cool. Thanks.
All right. So I will come back on at exactly an hour. Like when I sign off, I'm going to set my phone for 1 hour and I'll come back on. You'll see my face on the screen and then you can start to wrap up your dialogue. Does that sound okay?
Yeah. Hey, one thing, is there any guidance around the conversation that you're giving us, or is this general dialogue?
General dialogue. You can talk about how you got into collecting, what you collect, why you do what you do, how you're able to do it. How you know, whatever you'd like, really.
All right, cool. Very nice. All right, appreciate it.
Guys.
All right, thanks, Jessica. All right. How you doing, Darryl? Good.
I'm pretty good, man. Just got off work, did a quick little workout out of the shower.
Yeah.
I'm about to go to a little art exhibit actually this afternoon, see we talk. So
yeah, I understand. I'm actually got COVID. So so I'm fighting through. I hadn't shaved in 2 days, man. I feel bad. And so I told Jessica, I said, hey, I'm gonna push through this one. But I was in Puerto Rico last weekend. I don't know if I just got it with travel, but yeah, I don't know, I'm just down. And my goal is.
How are you feeling?
I feel right now, I feel okay. I have congestion and I had body aches this morning, fever yesterday. So I think I'm getting better. I got a corporate meeting Monday in Orlando, so I'm trying to pull it all together so I can make it to that. You know how it is. So anyway.
Yeah, but I don't know if you know, but I'm in the medical field.
Mm-hmm.
And like I do anesthesia, so I was very much involved with it at the height of the pandemic.
Yeah, same here. So background is I've been until recently I was with AstraZeneca in one of their executives. So it's weird because with AstraZeneca we had our COVID asset was global, right? We didn't get FDA approval in the US. So I spent most of my time mostly in Europe, you know what I'm saying, like dealing with that. And I think I probably had COVID like maybe 4 or 5 times, you know, and it's funny because when you know the epidemiologist, you're like, hey, what strain do I have? It's very specific. I tell people all the time, I probably know more about COVID than 90% of the country, right? But it's all good, man. So I appreciate it. But hey, you know, as far as this topic, I think if we just want to walk through it, I think we might have met. I know we did. We met when you were here, just while your exhibition was at the Gantt. And I know Jessica, when she pulled works for my collection, it's interesting, right? When curators pull work, you don't really have a choice, right? You kind of just let them do their thing. And so it's not like some of the stuff that I would have probably picked, right? You know what I mean? It's like, man, well, there's Sam Gilliam right here. Or what about this Lee Thompson right here? You know what I'm saying? And so, which is cool. But would love to kind of, get from you, kind of your thoughts, kind of what you've been doing since we probably last saw each other. Your exhibition was at the Gantt as far as collecting.
Yeah, well, it was interesting doing that show at the Gantt. My impression was at that time, the Gantt was kind of a little bit in its infancy stage in terms of focusing on the center as an artistic kind of center.
Right.
And even more so with contemporary art versus master artworks.
Yeah.
So even though I was happy to have the show, it would have been really interesting if I had done the show now, because my collection has grown a little bit since then and even got a little bit more honed. And I even know more so now what I want to do in terms of connecting collecting that I wanted to do then. I still am on a path of collecting mostly contemporary younger artists.
Yeah.
And that's what I changed that when I moved back to DC in like 2007 or so. I kind of shifted my focus from master artists into young living artists.
Right.
Not that I love the masters. I know all about them. And if I have a chance, I still would collect them if possible. But financially is one reason that I focus on the young artists, and also to just getting a chance to kind of just add some fresh work and fresh eyes and fresh perspectives to the art scene.
Right. Yeah. I get that. And I think for me, I've been collecting for a while, right? And started collecting probably through a connection with Dr. William Cleveland. I don't know if you know Dr. Cleveland down in Atlanta. This was probably been 30 years ago. And he's like, hey, you know what? I have Elizabeth Catlett coming to the house and somebody else. And that's how I started collecting. So for me, it's been really the masters. When you speak to that the challenge, and you speak it, and you're spot on. The challenge is, I told somebody recently, it's really hard to find good quality work. It's also really difficult to find work in general from some of the masters. I can find a study periodically, you know what I mean? But just like a really strong work. And when you do, the price sometimes it just doesn't make any, like I'm still thinking about the finances of it. It just doesn't make sense sometimes, And so you're exactly right. So I told somebody recently, I said, for me, I tend to buy less works because I'll save up to buy one master work, right? And one of the things that I tend to do a little different is I look for now works in the art space by not necessarily master artists, but who their friends and family, I call it, right? Who painted around them, instead of looking for Buford Delaney, maybe I'll get a Joseph Delaney, and so I would and you can find a masterpiece by Joseph Delaney, right? And you talk to most curators, maybe if you just not know our culture, you're like, well, who's that? Like, it's family. If you wrap around Bearden, you may purchase a Eugene Grigsby or something like that, right? Who was wrapping around him, or either sometimes I'll even go back even further. And one of the things I tried to do was in the 1930s, when the Harmon Foundation had those early exhibitions, late 20s, early 30s, I went and got the catalogs and tried to find every artist that was in those catalogs. Some of them maybe only had one work or two works that I could find, right? I mean, I found a work by an artist named Eugene Alexander Burke. Most curators like, who the hell is that? And literally phenomenal. Swan just sold one, I think, probably a year ago. And it's interesting because the work didn't sell for that much, probably 15, 20K. But just the fact that it finally made it up to Swan recognizing the artist, I thought it was pretty interesting. You know what I mean? It's like probably artists I had for like 15 years. So for me, I think that's where my collecting journey has been lately, is identifying some of those pieces and some of those artists. Which makes it a little bit challenging, right? Because unlike yourself, you get to know the artist, right? You get to know kind of whoever their dealer is. You get to kind of share in the journey. For me, it's a little different because it's finding family members sometimes. You know what I mean? It's like there are times where I had a family member of an artist recently, probably about a year ago, who was looking for work from their dad. And it was a daughter of an artist. I say man, older artist, and literally was going around the country to museums and looking for work, got my name from somebody, came here and started crying in my living room because I had a painting of their aunt. I mean, a large size work. So for me, though, it's those kind of stories that kind of keep me going, because I feel like if I don't find these works, sometimes they're just going to get missing, you know? So that's just kind of my thing. Would love to hear from you, because here's where I struggle. I love contemporary works and the contemporary artist. It's just so many of them.
Sure. Yeah.
So many. And you may say, hey, you know what? This is an artist that I want to add to kind of my collection, or they're up and coming. 10 years from now, you never hear from that artist again. I've seen this happen so many times, right? You know, how are you delineating, hey, here's an artist that I'm vetting or getting to know versus someone who I may take a risk on? You know what I mean? I mean, I can always go to probably art schools. But I know if I go to Yale and I catch a student, the student exhibition, or if they go through, Studio Museum of Harlem, they're gonna be good. You know what I mean? There's certain things, But what's your thoughts on that?
Well, one thing I must admit too, my collecting has slowed down.
Right.
And part and partial, one of the reasons is because I'm still trying to figure out exactly what my connection is with the art world and how to make this something significant and useful.
Right.
Because admittedly, of late, I've been feeling more like a consumer.
Mm-hmm.
And this gold rush, I'll call it, for lack of better terms, I'll describe, it doesn't sit well with me.
Right.
And that's both from the collector's perspective to me and from the artist's perspective. One thing I want to say, look, I don't have any problem. We'll probably touch about the finances of art. I have no issue with anyone making their money, but people aren't saying that. The communication is something much different. It's about cultural preservation and Black people and community, when I'm not so sure that's really the issues at hand. So, my collecting has slowed down a lot. And you're right, even though that most artists I collect are contemporary, I don't necessarily have great connections with them.
Right.
Artists, made this comment before, they're kind of like rock stars these days.
Right.
Their attention, they got lives and they're doing things. So, I don't necessarily have great connections with all of them, but my process still remains the same in terms of looking at artists that I think contribute something different to the language of art. That's a fancy way of saying it, bringing something different. And I try to look or identify, very skilled persons.
Right.
Those are it's a very vague kind of thing. I trust my eye a lot, just over the history of collecting over the past 15 years or so, being able to identify artists. But I do think for new collectors, it's a risk, because I think, again, there's a lot, especially in the space of portraiture right now. People are trying to make a come up. And so artists are making little adjustments to their works to imitate previous things have been successful.
Right.
And I don't know if all those artists for sure. In fact, I do know those artists for sure are not going to be around in the next 10 years.
I agree. Yeah.
It's a very daunting task for sure.
I agree. Yeah. I actually have a term for it. I call it big face black art. That's the phase we're in right now. And you know exactly what I'm saying.
Exactly what you're saying. So you're right. These days, when someone shows me an image and it's got, like a black person in it, and there might be a lot of flowers or birds or whatever. I gotta admit, it doesn't hit me the same as before. So you do have to look for these persons that are making really discerning things on what they're painting and investigate. But it's all a risk. And I would tell people, I don't like the phrase "buy what you love." I don't really like
Yeah, I agree with that.
But I do want you to try to get the best piece of artwork that your money can buy, or example of a person's work. Doesn't mean spend a lot of money, but whatever you can afford, make sure it's an excellent work or representation. That way, at least you have that to hold on to in the future.
Right.
But you're right. It's a very risky game if you're doing this now strictly for investment purposes and you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's where I early on recognized my lane, right? And I said, for me, it's how can I, when I say, I call it masters and friends, I kind of know what I'm getting into. You know what I mean? Like the challenge though is finding the work truly, and then finding the best works. And I spend a heavy load in conservation, right? Because sometimes you would find a work and it may be a extremely strong work and it may need conservation because it was the caretaker, whoever took care of it didn't do a good job.
Sure.
So I finished a fair amount of the work in that space as well. And I don't think people understand that that's sometimes that could be more than the work itself, to be honest with you. And so for me right now, that's kind of like, the space I'm in. I mean, in my home, it's how do I find large oil paintings really by masterworks, right? I mean, my office right now is pretty dark. So it's like works on paper, smaller works on paper. I kind of rotate in and out here. But for the most part, it's how do I find these larger oil paintings? And it's difficult. I mean, recently I found a sculpture by Meta Warren Fuller, which is great, right? I mean, amazing sculpture. A statue, and there was a older collector who was getting rid of some works in the PA area, and just so happened, just through connections, I was able to pick up this work. I mean, that doesn't happen that often like it used to. I used to could find works a lot more frequently. But I think it'll be here in a couple of days. But I mean, that to me is like, all right, that's kind of keeps me going a little bit. But to your point, I do struggle with some of the contemporary artists. And what ends up happening is I will wait until their mid-career or later career to purchase their work at a significantly higher premium. Yeah. Because at least I know that they're kind of proven in that space.
Sure. And I think if you have the financial wherewithal to do that, that's fine.
Right.
It's so interesting. You said a work came at Swan Auctions. He said it wasn't a lot, $20,000. Again, that's something I point out. Like the art world is the most bougie.
Yeah.
It is the most bougie, high-end money game that you can be in.
It is.
Because let's be honest, for the majority of us, even Black collectors, I think $5,000 is a high threshold.
It is. No, you're right.
I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form of being exclusionary. I'm talking pure finances.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, we spend our money a lot of different ways.
Right.
But for somebody to take up $5,000 more, that's $20,000 and spend on this tangible, this object that's not that, tangible. It sits there, doesn't do anything. It doesn't drive. It doesn't hold items. It doesn't.
Right.
It's a tough sell.
Right.
But so I think most people probably can't afford to do that strategy you talk about, which makes sense if you can afford to do it, to wait and see, no doubt. I've done a mixture. I bought some works at higher ends, and not most times not because I was waiting, but because I couldn't get access.
Right.
It's still an issue.
Right.
So I ended up getting works at a later point. Occasionally that happens as well. But still trying to find works early where I can, kind of mitigate the financial expenditures up front. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I, like I said, I run into it. And like I said, for me, it's buy less work, but
Sure.
try to buy, one or maybe one a year, one every other year, maybe a significant piece.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to talk about the access piece, because I think that is a challenge.
Yeah.
It's still a challenge. And I see it with our artists. I see it sometimes I see it in gallery spaces. And when I see it in institutional spaces. So I'm chair. So, I'm chair of collections on the board at the Mint Museum. So one of the things that even with them showing my work, it's kind of a little odd for me is, and you'll get this, is I didn't want it to be a vanity show where, oh, you know what, this guy's on our board, we're going to show his collection. That feels really weird to me.
I get it. I mean, you have a lot of integrity for saying that and feeling that, because I don't think most would. Most would
Right.
have no issue with it all, or nor even see the possibility of a conflict of interest doing it.
Right.
But
And
I want to reassure you that it's still, I don't mind it, because I know you have significant works and your intentions, even though my second time meeting you, are pure. So I'm okay with it. Go ahead.
yeah. No, I appreciate it, but that's one of the things I thought about, right? Even when they ask, right? I'm like, it's interesting. And so talk to me about, so when I say access, right, back to that, I look at it a couple of different ways. I have different purview, right? I can see it from an institutional level, literally, right? Works that come in. I see it from just people the attendance. I see also just access to galleries, access to artists. There's some artists that we're not going to name here publicly that you would know that if I reached out to try to purchase a work and they were like, well, I'm being very specific on who I want to give my works to right now. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But, that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Well, bro, as I said, in many respects, this is a game.
Right.
And this whole thing about, I mean, I've run into this thing where galleries have talked about buying two works, one for donation, one for you to keep, or telling me if you buy a work, we need you to make a contribution to a certain institution to get on the list for consideration for work. So I think some of this is racial, some of it, but in large measure, I still think it has to do with class and position, a lot of it. And if you're not known in this, since we aren't having, Black people traditionally have not been in this space, we're not known to these people.
Right.
And I bought works from artists early. And then as soon as they get with a gallery, I can no longer get their works and get those better iterations of works, which is actually doubly frustrating. Right. But this is where I also lie responsibility with the artists too. When I spoke about their talk about community and Black collectors, I mean, artists have the power. Right. If they said, hey, listen, I'm going to sell this work to Quincy. I don't care what you guys say. I'll make some other works, not to go around you or skirt the gallery's involvement through the gallery. But this work is for Quincy. They can do that. And if the gallery says no, then guess what? If your artist works good, another gallery will pick you up.
Right.
They have 100% control in this situation.
Right.
And it's incumbent upon them to speak up, not just kind of like this innocuous kind of language. Well, you need to sell the Black collectors. No, specifically, if you know Black collectors out there, point them out and get these works in Black collectors' hands. So yeah, that the access, particularly if an artist is doing well and you want to get an artist, it's very difficult these days. Right. And this is happening sooner and sooner. It's almost, if you don't get this artist in school, when they come out there with a gallery, I feel kind of bad for the young collectors. It's really difficult unless you have some pull or know somebody or whatever.
Yeah,
So,
I totally agree. I totally agree. And that's what I said. And this is why I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I think about this a lot, because I see work sometimes by some of the young artists, some of the contemporary artists, and I'm like, I just struggle with this whole piece of it, right? Sometimes it's getting access to the work. Sometimes it's just, the longevity of the artist, right? And I end up waiting. And there's an artist right now that phenomenal artist, and I think the artist may be even in your collection, I'm pretty sure. But I remember very early on, Diller sent me the kind of the run sheet of all the artists' work. And no, not the dealer, the artist did. This is before they had a dealer, to your point. Artist did. And I was like, well, I really don't know. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So got with a dealer or two. Now they've blown up and incredible works. And they were doing incredible works then. I saw the work, right? And so now, I talk to the artists. We go out, we can go out and have tea and coffee together. And literally while we're having tea and coffee, he's like, you got to call my dealer. You know what I mean? And dealer's like, well, I don't know if I can get your work right now. To your point, you got to buy two. I'm with the guy. You know what I mean? So I've been there. I've seen it.
Yeah, it's and just like all these other institutions that we probably haven't owned, until we start coming in these markets and participating on a full scale, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, I agree. So talk to me about, and I'll share my thoughts on it. One of the things that a lot of the curators, and just so you know, it's interesting. I know a lot of the curators and a lot of the museums in the Southeast, especially, really nationally. One of the things I hear all the time is like, "Hey, Quincy, you're holding on to a lot of work, a big collection of art." And a fair amount of people may know you, maybe not a lot, but they know of your collection. You never really share works. Periodically, maybe you may loan a painting to an institution, but not that often. If somebody reaches out and they're potentially going to write some type of resume, of course I'll try to jump into that. But for loaning works, I just don't. I just kind of live with my work. And so it speaks to like the legacy and what do you want to do? So this is another thing, right? So I'm trying to figure out, what do I want to do long term, right? Do I just at some point sell everything? So you got to do that slowly. That's a whole process, a whole game in itself, right? As you know. Do I give big blocks to institutions? What's your thought? What's your strategy on that?
Well, I do feel a certain responsibility as a collector. As I mentioned earlier, I'm trying to figure out what my connections and all this is. I do feel or believe as a Black person that part of my duty is to help show these images and works to our community for them to see them.
Right.
So I believe that I don't have an issue loaning works. When someone asks, if I feel comfortable with the whatever institution, whatever wants to do it, I'm going to loan it because I want people to see it. I have, like you said, you have a lot of works in storage. I have some works in storage too. I certainly can't look at all of them at the same time.
Right.
So I do feel it's a good way to help, both the artists, but more importantly for persons, hopefully in our community, see the works. Now, when these works go to big institutions, like whatever, the Met, the MoMA, or whatever,
right.
Not just Black people, but people in general don't go to museums. It's only a very select crew or crowd that goes to museums.
Right.
So any chance I think we get to spread these images and spread some of these messages of the artists, at least on the surface that appear to be, talking about us, I do feel that's part of the mission. Down the road, I've thought about donation, for sure.
Yeah.
After I leave the earth, and I have nephews.
Right.
Certainly will leave some to him if I deem that he understands the importance of it. I think people get caught up in that.
exactly right.
I don't know if your relatives will cherish these things as much as you
Right.
will at all.
Right.
If
You're
you
right.
don't educate them with you along with the journey, then they're not going to deem these things important. They'll get your soul in the fire sale.
Right. Exactly
So
right.
I do think if you find an institution that can take your works, that's great, especially, again, Black institutions that are capable of managing it, and also white institutions too, to help, broaden their horizon about what they have in their collection. So it's a three-pronged thing. Uh, donation for to institutions, lending works for people to see, and of course the financial
Benefit. Right.
works that that can help you financially.
Right.
I don't see anything wrong with that. There's a big, it seems to be a little about controversy about people selling works, which the artist not getting financial
Compensated.
compensation. I'll leave that topic alone for a second, but the idea that if you have something that can inexorably alter your life, for example, like if
Right.
you had a Basquiat and it was worth whatever, $60 million,
Right. Right.
and you bought it and you were just living or whatever, like, I don't know how you can tell someone, no, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't sell it. You should just keep that work. That person
Right.
chooses to do so. I don't
Right.
have any issue with that. And that in turn, actually for the artists, it increases their primary value as well. So granted, the piece about them not getting, compensated for that secondary sale is one issue, but they get a benefit from it eventually as well too.
Yeah, they do. And so for me, it's a little, I deal with that a little less, right? Especially if I'm dealing with, I call it older masters. A lot of them are dead.
They're not alive. So
Right. They're not alive, right? I've never, well, I've had estates come, right? I mean, I've had estates say, hey, they at least want to know sometimes if I'm selling the work, right? But for the most part, yeah, a little less having to deal with that. But to your point, so my struggle, I think for me is just that when I purchase the works, I truly purchased them to live with them. You know what I mean? I didn't purchase the works in the beginning. So it's changing over time. I didn't purchase works in the beginning, my wife, my kid. We just live with the works, and so my son, I want him to grow up appreciating art. He lives with it, right? I mean, and so what I try to do is get works that may trigger him, right? So for example, he's 15. And if I get a Hebrew Brantley, he's like, man, that's pretty kind of cool. You know what I mean? So he doesn't even really know who Hebrew is. He just know, man, that's pretty cool work I got in my room, and so it's those type of things. And how do you live with, so for me, it's just living with the work.
Sure.
So, I mean, even like, it's like, Dad, some of your work's going to be gone. What are you going to do? I don't know if you were on the call. Jessica was like, hey, what are you going to do? Are you going to put more works up? No, not really. These works have kind of grown into their spaces, right? And so this is where I think I think I need to evolve my thinking a little bit, because I'll loan works periodically, right? And there'll be a good work. I'll say, oh, you know what? I'll loan a work. And sometimes it'll be work that we've seen published that I own. I own a lot of self-portraits, like a lot of self-portraits. I mean, some master ones, right? Stephanie Jackson, Otto Neal. I mean, Lois Mallow Jones, which is on loan right now, I own one of her self-portraits. So a lot of amazing self-portraits. It's just kind of been my thing. And so periodically I'll loan one of those out. But for the most part, a lot of times I'll just kind of, I don't know, I just got to evolve my thinking around it. I really do. And so, go ahead.
Admittedly, I think that's the upper level of being a collector. And this
Right.
is new to us. I'm sure most of you're like me, I'm first generation collector. My parents
Right.
didn't collect artwork. This is new to me. And
Right.
we didn't have that history that other communities have of buying works, donating works. It's new. So I feel like what you feel. God, I worked all this time to get this thing in my house. Now you want to take it away from me, and you want me to
Right.
either say goodbye to it or permanently loan. That's a big ask for someone who spent their hard-earned money to do it. So some of the selflessness that's involved with doing that, I think we have to give ourselves some grace. And I don't disparage you feeling those feelings at all. And you, just like your collection is involved, I think your thinking will evolve to the things that I was making reference to a few moments ago. So yeah, it's completely okay. No problem at all.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think, like I said, I think that that's kind of where I'm at now. And it's so interesting because sometimes I own multiple works. I mean, strong works by artists. I'm like, you know what, I probably should loan this one, or I'll have curators come by and they're like, hey, you got this Barclay Hendricks that you ain't not loaning out. I'm like, no, I'm just kind of live with it. It's in the theater. You know what I'm saying? But no, I just gotta kind of, I'm gonna evolve. I'm slowly.
No, take your time, brother.
Yeah, slow to get there.
No
So in the time we have left, I know one of the things that we didn't really touch on, but I think it's a big challenge, is kind of the two areas, right? Caretaking of the works and the financial part of it, right? Like for me, I mean, that's a big part of it, right? To your point, I'm being a lot more strategic on what I purchase, where I spend my money, trying to identify, like I said, even for me now, because I can't find a lot of the masters that I want, I've relegated myself to, artists that were around them, right? Can't really find another Charles White, but if you can find artists that were around him in that circle, you may find a nice masterpiece, right? And so for me, and sometimes I may get pretty good deals on those because the artists are lesser known, or there's a fire sale. You said this earlier. There's a fire sale by the either estate, the uncle, aunt, cousin, sometimes kids. And so, I mean, even recently there was an artist that literally, it was about 20 or 30 works that was literally at a pawn shop. It's unbelievable. And I tell you the artist was, because I was going to try to get all 20, by the way. I had no reason to get all 20, but it was literally, I would have parsed them out to multiple institutions, to people, and somebody in the family came back and got them 3 days later. Right? I mean, it's just that kind of stuff, right? And so talk to me about, like, as you're thinking about two aspects. I think we talked one, the finance side of it, how you think about that. And we kind of touched on it a little bit, and then maybe dovetail in being a caretaker of the works.
Yeah, I when I talk to people who are collecting, and I'll go back to that comment about buy what you love. And I say that's terrible advice, because you could be walking down the street and see a painting and love it.
Right.
And I don't have an issue with you buying it, but the question is, what are your expectations? See, that's what you have to ask yourself. So if your expectations is to just look at that piece of artwork and never have it loaned out, never have it appreciated, then yeah, you absolutely should buy what you love. But most people aren't earnest. Collectors want their works to appreciate. They want that value.
Right.
So you can't just simply buy what you love unless it's within the auspices of this game that we're talking about.
Right.
So yeah, I buy pieces of artwork. I don't necessarily know if every piece of artwork I buy is going to appreciate, but I know it has the potential.
Right.
And so I don't, I'm not thinking in the back of my head necessarily this person's going to be the next Kerry James Marshall or David Hammonds.
Right.
But I'm not going to buy artworks that aren't, that in some way in my head that I think the artist doesn't have the potential to be, significant.
Right.
And that's, people may balk at that, but it kind of goes part and parcel with how I look at artwork and collect artwork anyway.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. Right. And I tend to think the same way. The only area where sometimes I'll differ, and I won't spend a lot of money on these works, by the way, is some of the local artists that are either pretty well known, they have education behind them. You know what I mean? They're like, I call it, they're vetted. You know what I mean? Like in the show, there's a gentleman I got to work by named Brian Wilson. He studied with Dale Sart. He's, they're looking at potentially bringing him into a university. So to your point, it still fits the same mold, right? He has potential, but for me, it's like feeding into local culture, right?
Sure.
And so periodically I may do something like that every now and then. And even then I get nervous. Actually, I've been told that because the local community, this guy has a great collection, but he doesn't buy anybody's work locally. It's kind of like you, right? It's like it's probably about 3 or 4 that I know that I'm like, you know what, but I support them. I mean, like when I say I support them, there have been artists where I'm like, you know what, there was a young artist recently, and this is being a caretaker, and this is being about presentation too, who had a exhibition down in I think it was one of say Richmond, and it was showing his work. I didn't buy the work, but the guy needed it framed. You know what I mean? It's just the presentation wasn't right. All right, well, I paid for that and the shipping to get it there, but that doesn't mean I'm just going to buy the work. You know what I mean? So I try to support artists in that space and kind of be just a caretaker within the community. Is that a part of your strategy as well, or you just want to think about it from?
I do think this. I think I got to be honest. I think there's too much pressure on collectors to people. I mean, you're not I'm not Eli Broad.
Right.
I mean, I have a limited amount of resources.
Right.
So, I mean, I've had people comment and say, well, you don't have enough gay artists in your collection. Not true. There are plenty of gay artists, but you can't tell me who to buy. I'm spending my money. And we're not talking about trivial amounts of money.
Right.
So you can't be everything to everyone. And you have to buy, who you want to look at you in your house.
Right.
So, I think by just being a collector in itself, that word, I really don't like it, but you've taken on automatically someone who's being a supporter and patron and all those things. And I quite frankly think that most collectors are vastly underappreciated in what they do to support this market and support artists. I think they're vastly underappreciated. I'll go back on artists. Artists shout out when someone famous comes to their studio. They, post it on the Instagram, Instagram and all that. But the every average day person who's buying the work, you don't hear people shouting those names out.
Nope, not at all. No, not at all.
And I'm not talking about myself. I don't whatever, but I kind of resent that.
Right.
Everyday collectors, especially Black collectors, who take up their money, hard-earned money, and they spend it. No, celebrate those persons, what they're doing to contribute to this ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so, it's interesting. I was just looking at this work. It was a video work, and it reminds me to call the artist because I hadn't called them back. So video work, I don't really expect that to do any kind of appreciation, but it was an image of Martin Luther King. And I love Martin Luther King. I love him dearly. And I just think that this video, I just imagine that being in my house after I'm going to remodel my house. And I just know that, when I have a little, entertain that video in the corner on the little old screen, it'll just be a wonderful, interesting thing. I don't expect that to do anything in terms of appreciation. So that's something I'd buy just because I love it and my affection and adoration for Martin Luther King.
Right.
But the financial part of buying art, I think is something we should talk about. It should be not your main thing, but just like anything else, part of your portfolio.
Right.
You have some stocks, you have some real estate, you got a 401k, you should have some artwork. I really believe that. And I think that should be part of everyone's, if provided you have resources.
Right. Exactly. Right.
Again, I'll go back to what I said. It's a lot to add. So I understand that we're in a different kind of position, and not the average person doesn't have that resource to do that.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with that, and I think also, even when I look at, it's the resources for me. It's interesting as well because I have a wife who, she appreciates the art, but I don't know if she appreciates it like I do. And a kid who's like, oh, it's kind of cool. I think he actually does appreciate it. So there's also balancing, the needs of the financial needs, number one, of what's going on in the household, right? If I'm like, hey, I want to bring in this painting, and there have been times where my wife's like, I'm just not comfortable with the image, right? Where if it was me by myself, oh, this thing is amazing, right? and there have been times where that's happened. And are there other times where I think about from a legacy standpoint, you know, would it be some type of fire sale if something was to happen to me, right? Like literally, there is pretty bad. My wife was like, "Hey, if something ever happened to you, who do I call?" So literally, there's a list of people that she would call,
Yeah.
and and I try to put mostly curators, you know what I mean, gallerists first, you
Yeah.
know, and then but there are some you know, I mean, there's some of the auction houses are on there, you know,
Sure.
I'm like, hey, you know what, I mean, if you get in a pinch, and literally she was like, hey, which works are those, right? She
Yeah.
kind of gets that piece of it. So I think that's a part of it as well from a financial standpoint, a portfolio standpoint, that I start thinking about just how to manage that piece of it. Um, which as I get older, you know, I start thinking about a little bit more. I'm still fairly, I call it a middle-aged collector. I meet a lot of collectors that fall in the spectrum, right? They're young collectors and, you know, looking for contemporary works. I meet a lot of older collectors and they've have more master artists here or there sprinkled in. I'm kind of right in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Where I straddle the fence, where the works that I love are contemporary emerging artists. The works that are safe is like, you know, I mean, that Alma Thomas over there is pretty safe. You know what I'm saying?
Hella safe. I heard you mention Markley Hendricks. Safe.
Yeah, that's safe, you know?
Is you put your head on a pillow, sleep.
Yeah, right, right. And
Right.
so that's kind of where the balance is. Um, you know, that's just kind of where I'm at on that.
Yeah.
So right now, are you storing works kind of
Yeah, I'm preparing to actually remodel my house in large measure so that the artwork can look better in it. That's one of the, in addition to me just wanting a better living space in terms of how I feel.
right?
So a lot of the works are in storage, but even when I'm done, you know, I intend to probably build a little unit behind the house so I can do that. So
Yeah.
I'm paying for some works in storage right now, which, you know, I would say for the average collector, this is not a good thing. You know,
Right.
we've
It's not.
overdone it. We've been too zealous.
Right.
Our eyes gotten bigger than our stomach. And so I wouldn't advise that. When I tell people, I let them listen, if you can buy, let's say 1 to 2 artworks a year over
Yeah.
like a 5 to 6 year period, or even like I say 10-year period, that's 20 artworks.
Yeah.
That's plenty for any
That's
art.
plenty. Yeah.
You don't
That's
need
plenty.
to be
Yeah.
like us and own 100 works, which by the way, we know in the realm of collecting, that's nothing.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's nothing. But for the average person, you know, for you to have in your household and for you to do these things, we're talking about, you know, 20, 25 works is plenty. Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree. The biggest thing is, especially if you want to live with the work, right? And you do, if you're buying the work, but you want to see it, you know what I mean? Sometimes you just walk by and like, man, it makes me feel pretty
Yeah,
good,
absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And
Let me tell a quick
especially
little
the
anecdote.
size.
Let me tell a quick little anecdote.
Yeah.
I bought a piece of artwork with a friend of mine who really couldn't afford it, not afford, but he just, you know, he has a family, he didn't have
Yeah.
that money. So I said, listen, we'll buy this work together. I haven't figured out the legality or whatever. I didn't care. Just wanted to buy work. And he finally hung it in his house and he said, okay, Atwell, I understand. Because he had other artwork in his house that wasn't quote unquote fine art. He said,
Right.
man, he said, this thing just gets different. You know, it just makes my whole house look different. I was like, yeah, that's one of the purpose of it. It's visually stimulating and entertainment and just how you makes your living space feel different. That's one of the things I think it does. Yeah.
I totally agree. And it's interesting because a lot of the contemporary emerging artists are going so big right now.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's another challenge, right? And I have a pretty big home with a lot of,
Mhm.
so I bought the house, to your point, based on big walls, right?
Sure.
And so so I have big paintings and big walls, right? And but the artists now, I mean, they're painting huge.
Yeah,
Right?
they're pretty much, yeah. Because that's the market, because
Right.
they've been told, you know, you got to, not that always bigger is better, but
Right.
market dictates that when you have a bigger piece that it does well at market, and
Yep.
the bigger collectors and the museums want significant works.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And so that's one of the barriers, right, as well, because I think about, you know, there have been works that I passed on. I'm like, yeah, it's actually probably, I mean, it's great work, but I know I'm like, I start thinking about where am I going to put it? You know, what goes down, you know, that type of thing.
Yeah, that's reasonable. That's certainly reasonable for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Anything else? I feel like we covered a lot.
we covered a lot. We did cover a lot. Uh, where you're in North Carolina?
Yeah, I'm in Charlotte.
Okay, in Charlotte. All
Yeah.
right.
Are you
Okay.
ever now? Are you ever back this way?
I haven't come back recently. I mean, I don't. I was in school at Durham
Okay.
at Duke.
Mhm.
So I used to go to Charlotte back and they go to basketball games.
Yeah.
But I haven't been down there actually, since the show went up. But I know the city is kind of, a blossoming city still. And
Yeah.
I want to come visit the Mint. I haven't been, so I got to come check it out, man.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely check it out. And you're in DC?
I'm in DC, yeah.
Yeah. I literally was just up there last week. I flew up for a meeting at the African American Museum. I flew up for a morning, had a meeting at lunch, and I flew back that evening.
Sure.
So I'm up there a lot, and I definitely would love to connect with you next time I'm up.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I think it's interesting, right? And DC is an interesting art market as well. You know that yeah, Charlotte and it struggles a little bit because um, the biggest challenge here is we don't have a lot of galleries,
Sure.
right?
And neither does DC.
It doesn't really,
Yeah, we got great museums though.
got great museums,
Yeah.
but not a lot of galleries, right? And so the problem is where do artists, you show their work and who's representing them, and that's been a big challenge, especially for any artist of color.
Mhm.
I mean, I see the same thing with some of the Latin artists. I mean, they struggle in the same way, just finding someone to represent their work. So all of a sudden, I call it a lot of the best work locally you don't really see. I mean, periodically you have one or two artists that have blossomed out of here, the Von Logans of the world, you know what I mean, that have done amazing work, but not many that have made it to a national stage out of the Charlotte market. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, with some young contemporaries out of here that are starting to do their thing, so we'll see.
Sure.
Yeah. Hey, but here's the deal. Let me know if you're out there in the marketplace and you see some old school stuff, man. You got a guy that would be interested. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I don't need another Fred. I don't need another Aaron Douglas. I'm good on those. You know what I mean? I got a strong two.
Brother, that's spectacular.
Oh,
All day, Aaron Douglas.
oh man, I got it. All right, I do. I have a strong one. But yeah, don't need it. I mean, I'm good on that. But so I always tell other collectors, I think it's just a good community. If you see something, you're like, hey, you know what? This is maybe I know a brother that may be interested in this space. Let me know. Also, I think it's important. My space now at the Mint. I think for me, as we're looking to even identify works to bring in, we have a strong emphasis right now on a couple of different areas. Just so you know, it's works by Black Latin artists and then women. And so, I mean, a really strong effort and more contemporary works, right? I mean, we just bring in a Willie Cole. So we're looking at bringing in some contemporaries. So I'll definitely keep you in mind if that's something that you may be interested in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So
At
that's
least
all good.
2 minutes, man. An hour went by quickly, man.
Went by super quick. And the fact that I hadn't coughed my way through this is good.
Yeah, man. Brother, please take care of yourself. Just go.
Yeah. When I get off, I'm gonna go and get some rest. My wife just texted me that she's making a little soup. Which is good.
All right. I gotta give me one of those. A wife to make me some soup too.
Oh man, you don't realize how cool that is until you
Oh, I
get
know, it's a beautiful thing, man. I admire that. I mean, it's one thing.
Yeah.
You talk about someone like being by yourself and buying artworks, and it's great because I don't have to answer to anyone.
Right.
But it'd be lovely if I had someone that was even the slightest bit remotely into it. That union would be really, really lovely.
Well, it would be. And here's the nice part about it is it keeps balance, right?
Sure.
So sometimes there are times where I'm like, oh, look at this work. And it's like, well, is that the best work? Or, especially if it's a contemporary artist. Oh, we got to meet them. Like she's like into like, are they nice people? And so to your point, you meet somebody and they got this celebrity persona, and she's like, man, this guy was a butthole, or this lady was a little interesting. So it does help balance out. The other side of it is there sometimes that she'll like a work. The terrible part about it, especially on vacation. Oh, it's terrible. You go to the Caribbean, she's like, oh, you got to have that.
Right.
No,
Because that buying that work you love.
we do not have to have that. That's not there. That's terrible. And so that's the other side. Trust me. Yeah. I think the difference is when my kid sees something, for him, I try to put works in there, like I said, that relate, right? He's into sports, so I hit him with an Ernie Barnes piece, you know what I mean? So he got like an original Ernie Barnes, Hebrew Brantley. Like it's kind of whimsical, and so he kind of lives with the space, right? Even a collectible, like I recently put a document in his room that was signed by Frederick Douglass, right? And so he's like, Dad, Black History Month, we're talking about Frederick Douglass. I told my teacher, I got Frederick Douglass in the room, so it was a sense of pride for him, like, I live with the work, right? And I'm like, well, that's no show and tell item. How about that? You know what I mean? But I think just that's a whole nother component of having to think about the people around you and how you purchase works. I mean, even for me, there are works that I have at other people's homes, like my family's home sometimes, right? I mean, I walked to my mom's house and she had an artist that wasn't fine art. It's one of the popular artists, right? And I'm like, how about this piece? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so I'll do a lot of that as well.
Yeah. Brother, it was wonderful talking to you.
Yeah, it was good talking to you.
So it is actually 6:01, but we started at 5:06, but I can anticipate that the conversation has come to a close, and this is fine. We can end 6 minutes early. That's actually no problem. I hope you all enjoyed your conversation today.
It's nice.
It was nice. Yeah, it was a good conversation.
Oh, I love it. So much of my practice when I work curatorially is collaborative. And so this speaks so much to that. Darryl, I'm really grateful for your time and for your energy in this conversation and being willing to have a conversation with someone who, who you didn't know, and Quincy, who maybe you knew peripherally. So thank you for that. And Quincy, as always, thank you so much for your time. When starting this project, like curator is not my first title. I'm an artist. I have a painting degree from Carnegie Mellon, and then I have a master's in arts administration, and then I have a law degree, right? So I wear many hats. But a part of my curatorial process in working collaboratively, especially in this process, it's just like, Quincy, what do you want to show? Like, Nina, what are you interested in showing? Because I think something that you guys talked about in your discussion is like, these things live in our homes, and a lot of people don't have the opportunity to see them. And about all of your work, Quincy, more than anybody else. And so it's just so awesome to be able to like walk around your homes and hear all of you, the four of you, speak about what works you're most excited about. And that just gets me very excited. Quincy, I loved hearing you talk about your work in our tour. That was my favorite. Don't tell the other three, but that was my favorite.
Excited about that old school stuff.
Yeah, it was really great. It was really great. And Darryl, I hope one day we have an opportunity to meet in person, and maybe you could come see the show when it opens in July.
Yes, I will make an effort to do that. I want to come see it. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Lovely. Okay, well, you're going to be our VIP guest. So I'm sure that you get all the invitations to things, and I hope to see you both soon. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you. Hey, thanks. Darryl, it was good talking.